Hello, everyone. I'm Aoife O'Leary, the director of the SASHA Coalition, and welcome to our webinar today. We have a great panel of 4 panelists who we're going to put all of your questions to, so please have your questions ready and put them in the Q&A box as we go through. But first, we are going to start with my colleague Nuala Doyle, who's just going to run through an overview of EU regulation around green hydrogen shipping and aviation, which is what we are very excitedly going to dig into today. So I will pass to Nuala.
Thanks very much, Aoife. So thanks again. So I'm going to begin with a very short introduction to the SASHA Coalition by giving an overview of our progress to date, why we're focusing on green hydrogen for shipping and aviation, and finally, where current EU policy and regulations leave us in terms of decarbonising these sectors. So at a glance, what is the SASHA Coalition? SASHA stands for the Skies and Seas Hydrogen Fuels Accelerator Coalition and is a group of ambitious companies from shipping and aviation sectors who want to see stronger policies and regulations to support the use of green hydrogen to decarbonise their sectors. This is because current policy is driving sectors to solutions that long-term don't offer a route to decarbonisation, for example, biofuels and LNG for shipping. We want to change this and are calling for the EU to strengthen regulations to prioritise fuels with the greatest emission reduction potential over others, these fuels being green hydrogen derived. We also want to see limited supplies of green hydrogen targeted towards sectors that don't have alternatives, and this includes shipping and aviation. So where are we now? Since launching a year ago, we've begun to build our evidence base and policy positions. We published our Green Hydrogen Gap report last year, which found that all pathways to truly sustainable fuels for shipping and aviation require green hydrogen, and have used this as a foundation to publish our green hydrogen fact sheets. Our regulation roadmaps also chart our policy pathway for driving green hydrogen fuels for aviation and shipping. And finally, we announced our coalition membership. So we currently have 8 members, and our members span aviation and shipping, including hydrogen aircraft and vessel producers, fuel producers, supply chain actors, and consultancies. So a really diverse group across that shipping and aviation supply chain. I'm now going to quickly touch on the role of green hydrogen and green hydrogen-derived fuels as a key driver for decarbonisation in these sectors. So if we look at this infographic here, this is taken from our Green Hydrogen Gap report, and it shows that all pathways for sustainable fuels require hydrogen to a greater or lesser extent, obviously excluding that direct electrification pathway. If emission reduction is to be maximised, this must be the hydrogen with the lowest emissions, which is produced using renewable electricity via electrolysis. And today we'll be referring to that as green hydrogen. Looking at this slide, we can see a slightly more detailed visualisation of the fuel production pathways for aviation. And if we follow this green hydrogen line, we can see it feeding into all pathways bar that direct electrification at the top. If we look to the left, we can also see that different fuel production pathways have different feedstocks. These different feedstocks have different climate impacts over their full lifetime and also different constraints on their availability. For example, looking at sustainable aviation fuels, the HEFA fuels produced by waste oils and fats are already in high demand from other sectors, such as road transport, for their own decarbonisation. So we will see availability constraints on those. We also see greater emission reduction potential coming from fuels produced using green hydrogen and a renewable source of carbon, such as that captured using direct air capture. And also we've got to remember that if these hydrogen fuels are to be rolled out at scale, we're going to need to see a significant increase in both the renewable electricity feedstock used to produce them, electrolyser capacity to produce the green hydrogen, and also ultimately e-fuel production facilities. Looking now to shipping, we see much of the same story. Green hydrogen used directly as a fuel, ammonia and methanol are the most promising fuel options, and all of them require hydrogen. For methanol, This can be produced using either a biogenic source of carbon or carbon captured directly from the air. And again, while direct air capture is a technology that must be scaled significantly, we see issues with the use of biofuels due to the limited supply and possible land use and biodiversity issues associated with their use. And this also applies to biofuels use in aviation as well. So let's move on to look at the policy. And the headline figure of 28% of EU transport emissions coming from aviation and shipping demonstrates why it's important that we act now to decarbonise these sectors. The Fit for 55 package of policies implementing the Green New Deal aims to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across the EU by at least 55% by 2030. And so what does this mean for shipping and aviation? So on the maritime side, we have the Fuel EU Maritime file. This calls for an 80% reduction in the greenhouse gas intensity of fuels used in the shipping sector by 2050. This will include measures such as a requirement for synthetic fuels to make up 2% of the fuel mix by 2034, among others. At the EU level, we also see the ETS covering some emissions from shipping and a commitment to include some non-CO2 emissions from 2026. If we cast our net wider to look internationally, the International Maritime Organization has committed to a target of reaching net zero emissions by 2050. And again, this includes some sub-targets, for example, one around the uptake of zero-emission technologies to achieve this. So looking at the wider package of EU policies, we don't think these currently do go far enough, and we want to see Fuel EU Maritime include higher mandates for the use of synthetic fuels, as well as a commitment to match IMO emission reduction targets. Looking over to aviation now, we again see commitments to increase the amount of alternative fuels in the fuel mix through Refuel EU Aviation. Headline targets here include 6% of fuel to be SAF in 2030, raising to 70% in 2050, with 1.2% of fuel being hydrogen derived in 2030 and 35% in 2050. Some aviation emissions are also included in the ETS, as you can see there. And again, as with shipping, we really need to see stronger regulations here, starting with more ambitious mandates for the uptake of green hydrogen fuels from Refuel EU. We also really need to see confidence that these mandates won't go down, as this will be necessary to stimulate investment in fuel production, that there's confidence that there will be that demand. The ETS should also be expanded to cover all international flights and to account for non-CO2 emissions, as these contribute significantly to aviation's overall climate impact. And finally, for both shipping and aviation, we really need to see cross-sector collaboration between stakeholders from across the supply chain to drive this transition. So in this spirit, I'll pass you back to Aoife now to introduce our panellists.
Brilliant, thank you, Nuala. So unfortunately, two of our panelists are actually having trouble joining, so hopefully they'll be able to join relatively quickly. But the two we have right now are Bartek Gurba from DG CLIMA and Oscar Felix from Future Proof Shipping. And I'll give them both a moment to introduce themselves. But we're also hoping to be joined by Franklin Streichenberger of CO2 Value Europe, and also Dominic of ZeroAvia, who is a SASHA Coalition member. But I will pass to Bartek first to introduce himself and say a bit about what he does, and then we'll pass to Oscar for the same, and then we can dig into some Q&A.
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation first, and yeah, apologies from my deputy interview, Marcus, who couldn't make it today, but happy to replace him. I am working in DG CLIMA, dealing mostly with decarbonization of shipping, and I focus my work on the IMO negotiations and the Innovation Fund. I worked previously also in DG Energy on the decarbonization of gas package and hydrogen package, and hence I think I can share my opinions here well. And just maybe a couple of words. Indeed, we are in the state of emergency, not only in times of climate change, but also when it comes to the need to scale up technologies to decarbonize fuel consumption. I think thank you very much for the introduction. I noticed was a very good point on that. We need a lot of coordination. We need the whole value chain getting engaged, and yeah, happy to also share my views on that. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you. And we've now been joined by Franklin, which is brilliant. Apologies that you were lurking on the attendees. I'll let Franklin maybe introduce himself and what he does, and then we'll pass to Oscar.
Of course, thank you. So I'm Franklin Streichenberger. I'm French. I joined the CO2 Value Europe team about a year ago. So CO2 Value Europe is the European association dedicated to carbon capture and utilization, representing over 115 members along the CCU value chain, from CO2 producers, converters, users, etc. We focus on three main products, which are CCU chemicals, so replacing the carbon feedstock, for example, in plastics, packaging, but also medicine, and CO2 mineralization, capturing the CO2 permanently, stocking it permanently into building material that you're going to be able to, such as cement, for instance, and you're going to be able to build infrastructure, houses with. And the last topic, which is the topic of today, is e-fuels, of course. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Franklin. And Oscar, would you like to introduce yourself and all you could do?
There we go, unmuted. It's a pleasure to be invited, and thank you for giving Future-Proof Shipping an opportunity to share a little bit about our experiences. So for those who don't know me and don't know Future-Proof Shipping, my name is Oscar Felix, born and raised Norwegian, now live in the Netherlands, working as commercial manager for Future-Proof Shipping. Future-Proof Shipping was started with a very simple idea. We want to accelerate the transmission to zero-emission shipping. How do we do that? Well, one thing is, of course, understanding how do you either build new zero-emission ships or how do you retrofit existing ships. And then secondly, we take that learning and we build our own fleet of vessels, but we also help other ship owners out there convert their vessels or look at their business case and figure out how they best can reach a zero-emission reality. We currently have two vessels running on hydrogen, one being behind me here. This is the H2 Barge 2, which has been sailing 100% green for about half a year now. May last year, we launched the H2 Barge 1, which has been sailing now successfully for more than a year on hydrogen. We have two more vessels that we plan to convert in the next 1 to 2 years to run on hydrogen as well. And we have fairly hairy ambitions for the next 6 to 7 years, where we're aiming at least 20 to 25 vessels in our fleet by 2030. So to summarize it a bit, we are, of course, a traditional ship owner with P&L accounts and all this, but we're also idealists, that we really, really believe in a zero-emission shipping future.
Brilliant, thank you. And on that optimistic note, maybe the first question I could put to the panelists is, what is your vision for green hydrogen in the aviation and shipping sectors across Europe by 2030? So we heard a little bit just there from Oscar, and I guess within Future-Proof Shipping, what your goals are by 2030, but would love to hear, I guess, a bit more about how you see the sectors and what green hydrogen can do to decarbonize them. I'm sure if there's someone who wants to volunteer to go first. Maybe Oscar, if you want to pick up on what you were just saying.
Certainly, I'll just keep on with my train of thought here. So there are different, shipping isn't just shipping. So what you see behind me is a barge. A lot of people would say that's not even a ship. It's barely a boat, and they might be right. So different types of hydrogen will be viable for the different types of shipping markets. So for our inland market, compressed hydrogen was the most viable. It offers the best balance between cost and efficiency. For longer distance vessels, we are now developing coasters, short sea vessels going between intra-European ports. And there we see compressed hydrogen will not be good enough. We'll have to bunker too frequently, and their liquid is probably the only viable option. You have even longer sailing routes where you're going intercontinental, and there hydrogen, neither liquefied or compressed, will be good enough. You're actually going to have to convert it into ammonia, but it will still be in the end a hydrogen-based fuel source. So that's where we are sort of seeing the lay of the market developing in that direction.
Brilliant, thank you. And we are now joined by Dominic from ZeroAvia. So apologies for the IT issues that you had. There's always at least one person, if not two, who do. Yeah, apologies for anything on our side. That was, but would you like to introduce yourself to everyone? And I just asked the question about what your vision is for the use of green hydrogen in shipping and aviation by 2030. And I know ZeroAvia just put out a white paper, which has definitely some thoughts on that in it. So would love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm Dominic Weeks. I'm head of external affairs for ZeroAvia. So I'm responsible for all of our communications and also our government relations. Yeah, we're for those who don't know, ZeroAvia, we're a company that was founded about 5-6 years ago in California originally. Now have big operations in both the US and the UK, and looking to expand into the EU as well. We've basically looked across the board at the various solutions to deliver sustainable aviation, and we think that hydrogen fuel cell is the furthest reaching environmental solution, but also the one with the most economic upside as well for operators. So we can actually deliver over time lower cost flights and a clean future of flight, as opposed to increasing the cost burden. So we've flown a number of prototypes, and as you mentioned, Aoife, we're now looking to market entry. We're hoping to have a solution in the market by 2026, so a couple of years' time, flying up to 20 passengers, and further than that, then looking to expand another couple of years down the line into large regional turboplots, which are carrying a good number of passengers on European routes, so up to 80-seat aircraft. In terms of our vision, we think that hydrogen as a direct fuel source for aviation will scale quickly. So we have our roadmap for our own solutions this decade. So we think we'll see operations in European skies flying with zero emissions and flying passengers and cargo. And if we look at the work that the ASEA, the Alliance for Zero Emission Aviation, has done to kind of both baseline and then look at an ambitious scenario, there's a huge potential for a massive volume of zero emission flights on hydrogen fuel by 2050. So that 2035 line in the sand that people have often drawn with aviation, we think can be brought forward. We can see operations before then, and we can scale up quickly. So hydrogen has a massive role to play in the aviation sector, and there's a huge demand.
And I think, Bartek, were you going to come in earlier maybe to answer my question about your vision for 2030?
Yes, thank you. I think, I mean, of course, a very good point already made. As you know, we have, of course, some political goals also on deploying hydrogen in the EU. I think this will like 10 million tons of annual renewable hydrogen production by 2030. But I think what is really, once we are closer now and understand more the topic, and indeed we see a lot of projects popping up, a lot of production sites, partially also supported by the Innovation Fund and the auctions for hydrogen that we are organizing. But I think when it comes to shipping and aviation, the point will be to really establish, and that would be great if that can happen until 2030, to establish the supply chain from the production to down to bunkering and storage of the fuel, with all the safety protocols and with all the issues, also preventing environmental hazard and so on of hydrogen and derivative fuels like ammonia and methanol for shipping. This and because it's, and indeed in case of shipping, it's not only an issue of to have it in the EU, but also to start building these supplies also outside of Europe. And I know that countries like Singapore, but yeah, also Japan, China are doing a lot in this direction. I think this kind of hardcore infrastructure part and the supply chains, that would be great if we can have a decisive movement towards that until 2030.
I guess it's my turn. So we don't have exact vision for 2030. We constructed a vision actually for 2050, based on the assumption and the goal by the European Commission of reaching climate neutrality. And we convened to build this position with scientists. And the idea, which is a bit unconventional, is to see where each technology would have the most relevant use. Hydrogen, of course, is very useful, and derivatives, of course, we work on it. But as we've seen, as said by the Commission, there is a limited amount that can be produced in Europe. There's also a high cost. And so our vision for 2050 is actually that hydrogen derivatives will represent around 35% of fuels for maritime and 38% for aviation sector. And the question is, it's the necessary amount to be the most efficient for the EU to reach its objectives. That means now rolling, going to 2040 and 2030, that you need to have all the necessary both policy and infrastructure elements in place in the EU to reach that objectives and to reach climate neutrality by 2050.
Great, thank you, Franklin. And you mentioned there some of the challenges, and we have a question in the chat from Emma, which is just what are the biggest challenges to actually the rollout of green hydrogen and green hydrogen derived fuels for shipping and aviation. And I'd love for each of you to just take a moment. I mean, in the SASHA Coalition, we work specifically on the policy, and that's where we're quite focused, but I appreciate there's a lot of other challenges out there and would be interested in what each of you sees as the biggest one. Who would like to start with that wonderfully uplifting question?
Well, if we're talking uplifting, I can do that because on the aviation perspective, I suppose. I mean, you know, on the technical side for introducing hydrogen, one of the big challenges is volume. It's an amazingly good fuel in terms of energy density, in terms of weight, which is obviously hugely important when you're trying to fly an aircraft. But in terms of volume, it's challenging. So one of the things that we're looking at in particular for aviation airport use cases, you're likely going to need for any aircraft above 20 seat, you're going to need liquid hydrogen. So you then have to contend with the infrastructure involved in liquefaction as well as gaseous hydrogen production. So that's kind of more on the technical side. And then on the policy side, I mean, I think a lot of the policy developed so far for hydrogen quite correctly is kind of industry agnostic. And so, you know, the SASHA Coalition is doing a really good job to raise awareness of the demand profile for both aviation and shipping. But it's not really bad policy to say, well, let's focus on the sectors where there's a high volume need, where it's already being used. And then, you know, you can improve economies of scale, and that should of course help with aviation and shipping overall over time. I think that the problem there is that not all ports and airports are located in industrial clusters. Many are, but that creates a difficulty to kind of tap into that hydrogen production setup. And you will have low cost hydrogen in certain areas, but it won't always be the right areas to support airports. So what needs to happen is specific carve-outs that look at these promising, hard-to-abate sectors that can have a massive hydrogen demand profile over time. So I think the ASEA work identified about 2.9 million tonnes per annum for aviation in the EU by 2050. But when you look at the small initial aircraft flying, it doesn't have a high demand profile. So the costs of the economies of scale just aren't there. So yeah, that I think there's got to be a look at where can we have specific carve-outs that try and support these early sectors to build faith within the investor community that, okay, there is a real viable, workable model here.
Brilliant, thank you. And yeah, interested in whether, Oscar, from your perspective, obviously on the water rather than in the air, but do you see the same challenges as Dominic has just listed? You're on mute again.
Yes, I see similar challenges. The both advantages and issues with hydrogen is intrinsic to hydrogen, no matter where you use the fuel. The weight or volume, and especially the volume issue, is a hurdle that's difficult to overcome, and it's currently the biggest compromise. So we are unable to trade the vessel spot and essentially trade it in any sort of speculative way. You need to have a fixed sailing A to B because you need to be able to bunker hydrogen. You don't have much margin. If we cannot bunker our vessel within 24 hours, it will stop sailing. And that's not very good for us. It's not very good for the client either. So there's absolutely similar issues inherent to hydrogen.
Brilliant, thank you. And maybe then turn to Bartek as a regulator. What do you see as the biggest challenges?
Yeah, actually, thanks also really for Dominic and Oscar for these voices, because I have actually, what popped up to my mind is the challenges you identified from indeed, and I fully understand. Like first one, the demand, the scaling up. And I recall when we were starting talking about really hydrogen market, I think we had for some time a lot of debate about, and I think UK is doing this to a certain extent, to really engaging with grey hydrogen and sort of kickstart the market from there. Whereas in the EU, we clearly focus on supporting only renewable hydrogen and building the market straight here. And I think that is from the regulatory perspective, this quite a challenge to, if you build up the value chains, you need indeed the volumes, but you also may need that can be an incentive also for bringing up fuels that are not the one that really are bringing solution for the long term. And that I also see in terms globally. I mean, we're having this discussion also on IMO and precisely the issue of the whole value chain and well-to-wake emission counting, and not incentivizing fuels that then turn out to be increasing the emissions onshore. Is a big challenge, and I see that we're making this path more difficult in terms of precisely, maybe not immediately giving the volumes, but I think because we want to have the long-term solution, what is important is that indeed the policy is stable, is predictable, and the long-term objective, like the 2050 target, or not even target, that's in the EU, is a law, that this is a very clear goal, and that this gives the also the necessary trigger for the investments. And then the second point, I think it is what Oscar mentioned, which was then indeed the challenge of that indeed in the beginning you will have some bilateral agreements to scale to start production, but then, and this we already saw in other markets as well, at a certain moment you will need to jump to an open market, and of course because of course the ships will be interested in coming to harbors and freely take the fuel, and not, you know, only some ships like for the biggest companies in the biggest harbors will be having the fuel available, but the other ships will not. So I think our also ultimate goal is here to make the market open. And I think this is a path we also chosen in when we were establishing the regulation for hydrogen market, where indeed we need to have these warnings. Once the market starts developing, we then need to go to more open infrastructure, more open bunkering, and probably at a certain moment also depart from the bilateral agreements or make them more competitive. But of course, in the beginning, you need to do it, because otherwise you will not have a demand and supply matching.
Yeah. And finally, Franklin, I wonder if you've got any final challenges you wanted to add to that, or if they've all been said, or how is it you see the big challenges?
So my specialty is more policy. So I guess challenges are not unknown to SASHA Coalition. First of all, I fully agree with what Bartek just said on the need for visibility to trigger investments for all those value chains, both hydrogen but also derivatives. Then on more specific policy aspect, focusing on derivatives, I see two challenges. The first one is on low carbon fuels. For now, we have clear definitions on most of the different type of fuels, but we're lacking a definition here. It's expected in the coming months. But when you don't have a definition, you cannot sell, basically. So this is critical for the industry on that fuel. And then talking a bit more about CO2, which is a feedstock-free fuels, critical one. We have, of course, a goal at the end of closing the loop and not using fossil CO2. Now, for emissions, in 2041, you won't be able anymore to use fossil CO2, which is a very good thing. We're a climate association, so we think obviously it's a good thing to do, and we understand why the Commission did it. But unfortunately, considering the limited scale up of both the limited availability of biogenic CO2 and the limited scale up of DAC, direct air capture, which will mostly kick off probably in 2035, we see a limited potential for necessary investment from the industry that will allow in the short term to boost it now so that it can be used as fully renewable afterwards. The other problem here with the CO2 is that in this limited CO2, you have, of course, the fossil CO2 from fossil fuels, but you also have process emissions. And some industry like cement, lime, steel, they basically chemically they produce CO2, and this CO2 cannot be avoided. The EU industry is trying to reshore these productions which are critical in the EU, so it's going to be emitted in any case, and we're not being allowed to use it. So there's a tweak here to be made in the definition. If you want to reshore these industries, you need to be able to use the CO2, which is not coming from drilling new fossil fuels. So that's a couple challenges I see here.
I think that's a really good highlight in terms of, we've spoken about hydrogen directly as a fuel quite a bit, but in terms of e-fuels for both shipping and aviation, we will need a CO2 source as well. And there are really big questions about how that is scaled sustainably as well. And maybe that kind of ties into the next question I wanted to ask, because, you know, both Oscar and Dominic here represent companies that are on the cutting edge of innovation, and the EU prides itself on supporting innovation as well, and is also just a climate leader around the world. And I guess my question is, as we get to these sectors that are, you know, they're often called the hard to decarbonize sectors, which I hate, because I think actually they're not that hard. Maybe it's just we need a little bit more innovation, a little bit more policy. I'm just obviously a very optimistic person, but how do we ensure that we support innovation, but keep some of these kind of hard deadlines, such as like Franklin has just mentioned, in terms of climate in place? Any ideas from our panelists? Dominic, I see you want to start with that.
Well, it's just funny because I had a conversation with somebody earlier today where they were talking about, is it time to drop the hard to abate label for aviation? And my response to that was no, actually, because we really want to keep up the urgency. I think that on the innovation question, you know, there's a tremendous amount in place that is helping some of this work happen across different nations, investing in R&D programs. The Clean Aviation Program in particular has a number of big fuel cell projects, decarbonisation projects that are ongoing, and is pushing that forward. I think this is one area, though, where you can accelerate the traction, because the engineering pathways are there. We know we can have a solution that gets us right through to a narrow body aircraft ultimately. And then, you know, I'm sure it's the same across the shipping sector as well. There are improvements in the propulsion systems that will help us get there faster and take out emissions quicker. You know, using hydrogen directly as well as using it as a drop-in fuel via PTL. So yeah, this is one area where, whether it's Horizon Europe funding, we're just supporting R&D projects, and with more aggressive timelines, will make a difference.
Does anyone else want to jump in, Oscar?
Sure, I'll represent the seaside of sustainability here as well. Dominic is saying a lot that reflects us as well. And first, I have to commend the EU in general. Without EU, without the right type of subsidy funding, our company wouldn't exist, and I'm sure a lot of other companies wouldn't exist either. It has really helped to drive innovation, and on the technology side, so on the supply side of the equation. Now, where it's a little bit lacking is on the demand side. How can I find customers for my ship? How can we get them to either be willing to pay a premium, or how can we help companies like us, innovators, to reduce our operating costs? They've helped a lot on the capital costs, on the innovation side, on the investment side, but now we need the operating costs to get lower. That is currently the biggest hurdle, and there seems to be very little focus on this in the discussions I see. In the subsidy funding schemes that I see, it's pretty much all earmarked towards capital investments, and that's probably where we need to see a pivot.
That's a really interesting point, and maybe I can be a little bit pushy and put it to Bartek and see if he wants to answer that at all. But I'm sure innovation is something you're constantly thinking about in the Commission and how to support it.
Yes, thank you. And we are really, having also great experience and exchange with the sector and with all of companies that come and participate. And I think it's indeed there is a huge, on one hand, there are a lot of projects in purely innovation and research and development. I think we have like 400 sponsored projects on the shipping side, and probably the numbers on aviation are similar. But the point now, and this is really what we also see now, also with Innovation Fund, we need to start deploying these ideas, and you really can see they are on one hand, and this is really not only about fuels, it needs to also go hand in hand with efficiency measures. So more and more projects also go into this, ship using hydrogen-derived fuels, but also deploying some sales and using planning and so on. So I think we at a certain moment saw also a number of these projects in innovation which combine different technologies and modes. But I think we there need also to go further to start scaling up production. We started therefore with this Innovation Fund auctions, but I think, and this is really what Oscar mentioned, this is my bet would be this is coming now with the next Commission. How to make all this happen on the ground, how to strengthen the industrial basis, how to get also. We started Innovation Fund, for example. We would we are happy to fund projects for shipbuilding in Europe, in the EU. But how practically then operate and what what you also mentioned with matching the demand and the suppliers, the project. So certainly a lot of coordination tasks ahead of us.
To seeing what comes out of this new commission for sure, I think as all of us will. Franklin, do you want to add to that?
Well, actually, but Bartek mentioned it. I was going to mention that Ursula von der Leyen, so the president of the commission, when she announced what she went in front of the parliament and to present her program to bid being re-elected, she announced in the 2.5 months that she'll come with a clean industrial deal, which the whole industry had been calling for in the infamous Antwerp Declaration. So to maintain innovation, that's a very good thing. We also saw that this will come with funding, which is very positive. We just need to make sure indeed that as was mentioned by Bartek, this comes as a funnel, starting from research. Horizon, the FP10 is going to be discussed now. We need to make sure these clean technologies are well considered in the new research funding program. And then we need to make sure that, fundamental research brings up more advanced research that we succeed in Europe to bring to the market with all these different steps.
I think that actually has led to kind of ties into questions. Sorry, Dominic, did you want to add something to that before I go on? No, I think you were unmuted anyway. Sorry, I just noticed you were muted. That's all. Sorry. Ignore me. Anyway, we've got 2 questions about renewable energy and just the constraints and competition that there's going to be for that over time. If you look at the amount we will actually need for projected green hydrogen demand to actually decarbonize these sectors, never mind all the other sectors that are going to rely on it, it's huge. And I'm not going to even venture a number because, there's any number of projections, but it's many, many times what we have today. And yeah, just so what do the panelists think about that kind of competing need to really build out renewable electricity, but also how does it, work in terms of converting that energy into hydrogen and using it in these sectors rather than using electricity directly? And what is the kind of cost and benefits there? Oscar.
The closer you are to the source, the better it is. If we could use electricity on our vessels, we would, but it's just not feasible. We need to be able to carry the energy with us, and the batteries wouldn't work. We will be able to carry 2 containers on the vessels. So then the hydrogen becomes the next best step. And of course, at a certain point, electricity prices becomes very high, which affects the hydrogen price. But you will always, as long as there's demand for hydrogen, you will always have people converting electricity to hydrogen through electrolysis, as long as it makes monetary sense. And it definitely will in the future.
Dominic.
Yeah, I think when you look at, there's a good report by the World Economic Forum and McKinsey on the aviation zero emission equation and what's going to be needed, and it's kind of 200 gigawatts of power, which is a global renewable in 2050 predicted to be about 8,800 gigawatts. So we're really looking at about 3%. And when you think about the fact that aviation as a sector is 3% of carbon emissions today and predicted to be 25% by 2050 unless we take some drastic steps, then that's certainly not a disproportionate use case. And I think to the question of the efficiency, the same remains. If we could use batteries, it would be in a more efficient system, but they're just not viable for commercial payload and range in aviation. So we really need to look at these solutions. Hydrogen will help us balance the intermittency of renewables as well. So it can be a real storage solution that helps bring more renewable capacity online. And when you look at I don't know if anyone managed to read the essay that was published last month in The Economist, but that looked at the overall cost projections that have continually been surpassed for renewable new renewable investment. We should be very optimistic about a clean future of ubiquitous, clean, low-cost energy. And that therefore makes the kind of efficiency loss in producing green hydrogen kind of less of a major concern. Where you end up with a concern, I think, is that if you're using that green hydrogen in an inefficient way in the early stages where it's not particularly abundant. So again, from an aviation standpoint, we've really got to get to highly efficient propulsion systems that use hydrogen in the best way.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to actually pick up, because you said earlier, and I've heard you say it before, about how in the end, at some stage, hopefully, I think maybe 2050 is your projection, that hydrogen planes will actually be cheaper than running on fossil fuels. And I'd love to hear just a bit more about how you, I guess, work those calculations out, and what is it that's going to drive down the price of hydrogen?
Yeah, so I mean, it doesn't have to go an awful long way for the hydrogen fuel itself to be cheaper than kerosene. And I mean, kerosine's relatively expensive fuel as it is. It's volatile, so there's costs for airlines in kind of managing that volatility as well. If you can get to the kind of €6 per kilogram hydrogen price, you're going to be very competitive with existing kerosene supply already. And over time, the projections from the likes of IRENA are that you're going to see hydrogen prices in the $1 to $2 per kilogram range. So ultimately, that's positive economics on the fuel side. Plus, fuel cells as a system are more efficient, and you're talking about electrified systems as well. And I'm sure some of the propulsion systems we're discussing in the maritime sector are similarly deploying fuel cells and electrification. And what that enables you to do is have fewer moving parts, less intensive systems in terms of heat, and essentially you need less maintenance, which for an airline is 25% of their cost base, their operating costs. So massive reductions and improvements there. It just relies on getting that green hydrogen or the clean hydrogen price into a competitive region, and then over time the green premium evaporates and you actually have a cheaper source of propulsion. That is going to be more difficult with power to liquid drop-in fuels because it's a less efficient process. It's also less to create the fuel, and then it's less efficient in terms of the flight on the aircraft. Kind of 30% combustion engine efficiency versus around 60% potential for fuel cells. So yeah, that's why we kind of think that hydrogen direct over time becomes the ultimate goal. But as you transition, you preserve the volumes of SAF that are created for the bits that initially fuel cell propulsion systems wouldn't reach. So perhaps long distance wide body aircraft.
That is definitely a very hopeful future of the cheap hydrogen flying, which was really exciting. Bartek, you wanted to come in on that?
Yeah, in general, because I think it's a very interesting question, and actually, on the issue of additionality of hydrogen production, and also the delegated regulation that went with it and the criteria, I think we spent a lot of time, and I think it took time, but I think there is of course a logic, because in the EU we are developing renewables, and it should happen quicker. And I hope with the new renewable directive, with all the simplified and accelerated permits procedure, it will happen quicker. But I think there is a reason that we developed the renewable production together with the electricity system, and with that you precisely prevent that you have some inefficiencies, as they were mentioned, because once if the production of renewables is integrated in the market also, then renewable producer can always switch between the markets, sometimes produce hydrogen, sometimes produce electricity. I can imagine that there could be cases that you have close by production and you fully are able to devote renewables to say wind production to producing hydrogen, but then you might be very much dependent on the wind. So still this connection to network might be of advantage. I see this as a challenge, as a more complex thing. A lot of permits, a lot of integration into the network is necessary and into the markets. But at the same time, it also gives some profits for the and possibility of choice for the producers. But it's definitely something that where we need to scale up renewables even more, and I think we are still quite far away, in particular when it comes to offshore, what can be done.
Well, I think, yeah, there's a lot of challenges there, but definitely options on how to do it as well. Franklin, I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that kind of cost of green hydrogen coming down, but also, I mean, CO2, and as you've spoken about earlier in this webinar, like the difficulties in sourcing sustainable CO2.
No, I think Musa, everything has been said. I'll just insist on the element. I think you mentioned cost, and this is why we really need to understand what are the technologies, the industry that cannot defossilize or decarbonize without this green hydrogen. This is, of course, the case of aviation and maritime, as I've said before. It's also the case of long-haul transport for some applications. And it's also the case, and we fail to remember it sometimes, of some industries. Some hard-to-abate industry use fuel to power their plants. And if we have those fuels, if actually maybe we combine it with more efficient planes with hydrogen, and we can keep the heat fuel, we'll be able to decarbonize more those plants, which cannot be decarbonized any other way for now. They cannot be electrified.
Oscar, is there anything you want to say on the shipping side and the cost of hydrogen coming down?
Sorry, I got a little bit distracted there. I had some things happening off camera here. You mind repeating what was the last talking
Just
point?
what are your kind of hopes or projections for the cost of hydrogen coming down in the future?
Yeah, well, there's several different aspects to this. One thing is the total amount of hydrogen available, but then of course green hydrogen versus gray versus blue and so on. And I'm really happy for any sort to come out, because there's a lot of industry uptakers, and the more of the type of hydrogen that we don't want to buy, which is anything but green, is in the market, the cheaper the price for green will be. Now, with regards to the amount of hydrogen that's coming online in the next couple of years, yeah, if you read the IEA report every single year, they have a projection. They have a nice little curve there, and it goes like that. I don't know if you guys are mirrored or not, but it's going in the positive direction. And if you then read the next year's report, at that point in time, the previous year's report's very sharp curve is already outdated. So I think the amount of hydrogen that's going to come online in the next 10 years will be more than we can ever expect. And it will be, of course, just pure snowball effect.
Yeah, let's hope so. Franklin, you wanted to add to that? You are on mute.
Sorry, yes. I agree. I just wanted to react here. The need, and of course we're going to be able in the IEA report show it, to produce more and more green hydrogen. At some point there is also a limitation as to where it is more efficient to use this green hydrogen, or the electricity actually to produce this green hydrogen. Sometimes, and depending on the industry, it might be way more efficient to use the renewable electricity directly. We also know that there are transformation points. So I fully agree with Oscar. I just wanted to bring that in.
I think to some of the points that were made earlier, for sure, about the most efficient use of all of the renewable energy. We are getting very close to the end, so I just wanted to give all of our panelists a chance to just say one final thing. And I guess I'd like to put a question to them, which is, in the SASHA Coalition, obviously we're focused on policy. And so my question really is, what is the most critical policy that we need to have in place in order for this to actually happen? All of this wonderful vision of green hydrogen in shipping and aviation that we've just spoken about for the past hour. And you can definitely say the policy is already there if you think that, or if it's just a policy that needs to be strengthened. But yeah, I'd like to hear what all of your policy ideas are. Dominic, I think you're eager to go.
Yeah, I mean, I have had a number which I think I touched on a little bit in various different areas, but I think that the single most important thing is probably to invest in R&D and D. So not just the R&D, but also the demonstration to bring to life and show the real world use cases ahead of getting to complex things in this industry, in particular aviation, where regulation takes time, so that you build faith. So I think what Oscar said was perfectly optimistic and absolutely correct, and you're going to see a surfeit of hydrogen ultimately. And I don't think we should discount. Obviously, there are some policy challenges, and actually, perhaps we're almost close to a tipping point where just a little bit of support can showcase aircraft in flight, ships moving cleanly using hydrogen. But what is also needed is just the initial investment in infrastructure at ports and airports to really demonstrate that, as well as kind of supporting the propulsion RD&D. But yeah, I think for me, there are a raft of things that could help. It would be great to see firm targets in the next iteration of AFIR, whatever that looks like, for airports as well, instead of just member state plans. It would be great to see the levers such as the ETS allowances, as you kind of mentioned, Nuala, in your introduction, and maybe more done in the Refuel EU aviation mandates to kind of push things more aggressively, particularly as airlines may struggle to make the SAF targets as they are. So maybe it's more of a push on PTL and hydrogen direct. But ultimately, I think the biggest policymaker support could be, continue to invest in RD&D and specifically for aviation propulsion in hydrogen would be great.
To add to there, hopefully, Oscar.
Yeah. With regards to policy, we already spoke a bit about it, and it's already been done a lot. And as Dominic points out here, RD&D, I like that. We are definitely in the D phase now. It's demo vessels that we have going. And I mentioned earlier here, a focus now pivoting towards the supply side. And I really think that is, of course, for me, who's sitting as commercial guy, speaking to uptakers, buyers of my product, that's where I want now the policies to focus on. So a good old-fashioned whip or carrot style, where we can't have any companies not being big enough to fall under the scope of ETS system. Right now, it's only vessels down to 5,000 gross ton who have to report and pay to cover their carbon emissions. Discussions about going all the way down to 400 gross ton, but there really shouldn't be any limit, and there shouldn't be a discussion at all. There's no good argument for there not to be, other than that, oh no, a lot of people have to do the investment. Secondly, not only the whip, but also the carrot. Give something positive to these companies, as in the form of tax incentives, but also encourage. In the end, we are carrying running shoes for Nike, wood pellets for IKEA furniture, anything like that. So in the end, it's the consumers, and you need to create a system where the consumers are able to see how well the supply chain of their product is. A lot of vegetables, groceries today, you can see which country it was grown in, and maybe it's in a country you don't like, that could be controversial, and you want to boycott it. You have that option. Right now, it's very difficult for consumers to know without digging, without reading annual reports, without reading articles, staying up to date. Things are behind paywalls. It's very hard for consumers to know which are the actually most sustainable companies, and making that more visual will also help with the carrot side.
Franklin, any final words?
Yes, thank you. I think policymakers to make informed decision need accurate information. When we had Repower EU, the Commission announced 20 million ton per year of hydrogen in 2030. In recent publication, it's not there anymore. At least lobbyists and observers cannot find the information anymore as a reference. And I think it makes it very difficult for the people to really make the investment, for the industry to make the investment, because we don't always know the base that the Commission is making. And of course, now considering this amount, it goes to the scarcity and the price of hydrogen. As I said before, I think we need to focus and really make sure that the hydrogen and hydrogen derivatives go to the industry that need it most and where it's the most efficient. It can be by the form of quota, preference, or whatever scheme we have.
Finally, Bartek.
Yes, thank you. And yes, a lot of wishes already noted, but I also, yeah, you might be aware. I think something which is on the table and which soon can be used is the auction for hydrogen. There will be a basket for maritime for offtake, also for maritime. For hydrogen for maritime off-takers. I think it's quite interesting to have a look at this. Also, in longer term, because these auctions mean that there's always a deadline, a couple of years until the project can start. So it gives also some planning possibility. For aviation, we have, of course, this 20 million allowances that will be granted to bridge the gap. And end of the year, we'll have more specific rules how this system gonna work. So this is also coming. And indeed, then the big thing on the negotiate, that would be my wish actually, that also on IMO level we have GHG pricing and the fuel standards, and that all our ambitions and matching the European the ETS and the Fuel EU has a slightly lower value or standards now. So then they could be matched then from the European side. That would also be a development, very good. We basically have in the revision of the ETS directive programmed for 2026 to take account precisely of these developments. And as Oscar said, I also personally hope that 400 GT will soon fall. The smaller ships will also fall under the ETS. Let's see. I hope maybe that even IMO will be able to set the policy measures not only for the above 5,000 but also above 400 ton ships. Yeah, so lot is happening, but of course we constantly need to improve.
Great, thank you. And on that note, thank you to all of our panelists. It's been really, really great, really rich discussion. I feel like I've learned a lot, and we definitely have a list of wishes and policies that I think we can put in place and improve on, which definitely the SASHA Coalition will work on. So if anyone of the attendees is interested in joining, please do get in touch. But yeah, just to say thank you again to all our panelists and all of you who have been listening in this hour, and we'll make this available afterwards and all that kind of stuff. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.